By John H. Davis by John H. Davis by 1968, the year in which he entered the race for the presidency, Robert Francis Kennedy had made many powerful enemies, both individuals and groups. Among the most powerful individuals who hated him were ex-Teamsters boss Jimmy Hoffa, whom Kennedy had sent to prison, Louisiana Mafia boss Carlos Marcello, whom Kennedy had unsuccessfully tried to deport, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who had grown to fear and detest Kennedy when the young Attorney General had been his boss, CIA agent William Harvey, former coordinator of the CIA Mafia plots to assassinate Fidel Castro, who was banished to the CIA's Rome office by an angry Robert Kennedy after Harvey sent unauthorized commando teams into Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and, of course, Republican presidential candidate Richard M. Nixon, who regarded Robert Kennedy as the only Democratic candidate who could defeat him in the coming election. The most powerful groups arrayed against Kennedy included the Teamsters Union, organized crime, the Southern California ranchers, resentful of Kennedy's support of migrant farm workers leader Cesar Chavez, the big oil companies and oil magnates. Kennedy wanted to repeal the oil depletion allowance, the military-industrial complex. Kennedy wanted to pull out of the Vietnam War, and the Southern white segregationists, who were violently opposed to Kennedy's ardent support for civil rights. A Robert F. Kennedy presidency would have severely threatened all these individuals and groups. For Jimmy Hoffa, who had actively plotted against Kennedy's life in 1963, it probably would have meant serving out his entire 13-year prison sentence, instead of receiving a presidential pardon upon Richard M. Nixon's election. For organized crime boss Carlos Marcello, it would have meant certain deportation. For Hoover, it would have meant the dreaded netherworld of immediate retirement. And for the Southern California ranchers, who contributed to a $500,000 contract on Kennedy's life in June 1968, the Southwestern Oilmen, and the principal American defense contractors, an RFK administration would have meant sure losses in the many millions of dollars. And yet, with this powerful array of domestic enemies, who turned out to be the suspected assassin of Robert F. Kennedy, a Palestinian Arab whose family had allegedly been forced out of West Jerusalem during the fighting that broke out after the expiration of the British Mandate over Palestine in 1948. With the range and power of Kennedy's known enemies, there was something suspect about Sirhan Sirhan's assassinating Kennedy for relatively hazy and difficult-to-believe political reasons. On close scrutiny, Sirhan's role appeared more likely to have been a diversionary one, a decoy to distract investigators from the true forces behind the crime. Who or what was behind the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy? In his meticulously researched and eminently responsible book on the crime, Philip Melanson does not give us a definite answer to that question. What he does present is convincing evidence that, whatever his role in the killing, Sirhan did not act alone. The author also provides equally convincing indications that the official investigative authorities consistently covered up evidence that suggested others may have been involved in the crime. In reviewing both the John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy assassination cases, remarkable similarities between the two emerged. According to an FBI report, both suspected assassins appeared to have had legends created for them in advance of the commission of their crime in order to account for their motivation. Oswald the mad Marxist and Castro sympathizer, Sirhan the anti-Israel Palestinian avenger. Both were stationed in high-visibility crowded areas at the scene of the crime. The police and the FBI declared both men to be lone gunmen, unaffiliated with any accomplices, determining this within days of the two crimes, long before the official investigations had been completed. Both appeared to be patsies, set up by others to take the blame for the crime. And in both cases the local police and the FBI actively covered up evidence of conspiracy. It is to Professor Melanson's credit that he refrains from indulging in wild speculation as to who was behind Robert F. Kennedy's murder. Rather, he largely limits his attention to the concrete, available evidence which indicates that the senator's suspected assassin, Sirhan, could not have acted alone, and that the Los Angeles Police Department, the Office of the Los Angeles District Attorney, and the FBI all tried to suppress and discourage the notion that Sirhan had accomplices. What new evidence has Professor Melanson uncovered, and how and where did he find it? First, it must be pointed out that Dr. Melanson is the first author of a reanalysis of the RFK assassination to have had access to most of the existing Los Angeles Police Department's files on the case. For almost 20 years, LAPD had inexcusably sat on its 50,000-page file of assassination documents, refusing to allow public access to it. Finally, after considerable pressure from independent investigators, including Melanson, concerned citizens, and the efforts of a few influential media figures, the files were finally released and shipped to the California State Archives at Sacramento, where they were redacted, organized, and finally made available to the public 2 decades after the crime. We are fortunate to have had a scholar of Philip Melanson's stature address the huge task of examining the long-withheld LAPD files. A professor with impeccable academic credentials and long-standing familiarity with the RFK assassination case, he is the ideal writer to come to grips with the tangled web of this unsolved murder. It took Melanson and his team of research assistants 4 months to sift through the 82,000-page mountain of RFK assassination documents, 50,000 pages of LAPD files and 32,000 pages of FBI documents. By the time he and his assistants were through, it was abundantly clear that the Los Angeles Police Department had altered, suppressed, and destroyed vital evidence in the case. Exactly what was destroyed? 2,400 photographs were committed to the flames in a medical waste incinerator at Los Angeles County General Hospital. Among these casualties were 3 rolls of film confiscated by the police from an eyewitness to the shooting who took pictures of Senator Kennedy at the very crucial moments when the shots were being fired. Why weren't these important pieces of evidence preserved for analysis by later investigators? Furthermore, of the 3,470 interviews LAPD conducted during its original investigation, tapes of only 301 of them survived. The other tapes were apparently incinerated. Moreover, of the 51 witnesses considered significant by the FBI and LAPD, somehow not one tape of their testimonies has survived. But that is not all. Among the items of material evidence missing were the following: at least 5 pantry ceiling tiles, 2 of which contain bullet holes, a pantry door frame containing 2 bullet holes, X-rays and test results on these ceiling tiles and the door frame, spectrographic test results on bullets possibly recovered in the pantry, as well as the left sleeve of Senator Kennedy's jacket and shirt. What else did Professor Melanson's examination of the LAPD RFK assassination files reveal? Melanson puts it bluntly when he writes that the files reveal that crucial evidence was ignored, altered, destroyed or covered up. Those conflict with the lone gunman scenario accepted and promoted by the official investigators emerge from Melanson's investigation. Yes, Melanson's seemingly bizarre but, on close scrutiny, believable scenario posits a second gunman firing the fatal shot at Kennedy from almost point-blank range, while a hypnotically programmed Sirhan, 3 to 5 feet away from the senator, fired wildly on cue, wounding 5 people but not Kennedy. Melanson also developed substantial evidence on the existence of a female accomplice in a polka-dot dress. She was seen repeatedly by numerous witnesses but, inexplicably, was ignored by the investigators. Who among Kennedy's most threatened enemies could have concocted and orchestrated such a complicated plot, one surpassing in imagination and daring anything James Bond ever attempted? On this issue Melanson refuses to speculate. He clearly believes, however, that some intelligence arm of the federal government, or intelligence expert under contract with the government, had a hand in it. He concludes that a coalition of Kennedy's enemies, those who felt most at risk by his likely election to the presidency, decided that Kennedy had to be eliminated, and awarded the job to the most sophisticated assassination team available. What, now, is to be done about this case? The release of the LAPD files was a valuable first step toward dispelling the disarray and misinformation that have marked the case from the outset. What should the next step be? Professor Melanson believes that an official federal investigative body with subpoena power, not from Los Angeles or Sacramento, but from Washington, D.C., must take up the task of pursuing the truth behind the still unsolved murder of Robert F. Kennedy. Only such an impartial body could ever hope to uncover the conspiracy that ended Kennedy's life and thwarted the American democratic process. If such an investigation ever does finally come about, it will certainly owe much to the persistence of Philip Melanson and the contents of this breakthrough book. New York 1991. John H. Davis is the author of The Kennedy Dynasty and Disaster, Mafia Kingfish, Carlos Marcello and the Assassination of John F. Kennedy, The Guggenheims, and the Bouviers. Prologue: The assassination of Robert F. Kennedy was a wrenching event. It was the third such case in 5.5 years. To many Americans it seemed as if the very fabric of their democratic system was being shredded by gunfire, as a trio of the most charismatic political leaders of the era were felled by assassins' bullets. But the Robert Kennedy case was different, or so it was perceived by most of the media and the public. This tragedy seemed not to be compounded by uncertainties about whether the law enforcement system was willing and able to respond effectively, or about whether justice could be done. In the cases of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., there was no smoking gun arrest. Lee Harvey Oswald never lived to stand trial. Major questions subsequently arose as to whether he perpetrated the crime. No witness even claimed to have seen King's killer fire the fatal shot. After a fleeting glimpse of a fleeing suspect, it took what was described as the greatest manhunt in law enforcement history 2 months to finally arrest James Earl Ray in London, almost 48 hours after Robert Kennedy had been shot. Though it was no comfort in terms of the loss of Senator Kennedy, this case at least appeared to have been solved. To most, it was open and shut. Dozens of witnesses saw the assailant fire. President John F. Kennedy in November 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. in April 1968. Sirhan, apprehended with smoking gun in hand, was kept alive to stand trial and was convicted. Finally, there was a case that seemed clearly to fit the mold of the politically motivated, psychologically disturbed lone assassin. The rumors and allegations of conspiracy seemed to the majority of the media and the public to be, for once, not only unfounded but easily refutable. Videotapes of the traumatic event were repeated endlessly. Here was the jubilant senator making his way through the small pantry of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, shaking hands. Then chaos and panic as gunfire erupted. Cameras captured the frenzied struggle to subdue the attacker. They showed us the terrible vision of Robert Kennedy lying on the floor and bleeding profusely. To this day, many people believe that these same cameras captured the actual shooting, as the Zapruder film had done in President Kennedy's assassination. Some are insistent to the point of anger that it's all on film. Like so many elements of this case, however, this too is an illusion. No photographic record of the actual shooting is known to exist. With the vivid footage just before and just after Kennedy was shot, and with such a seemingly clear mental picture of what allegedly transpired in between, a picture created by drawings, trial testimony and media accounts, the image of the crime seems to many to be real enough to have been viewed on film. As the following analysis will clearly demonstrate, this is a case dominated by false images generated by assumption, ignorance and official government disinformation. This seemingly simplest to solve of the 3 1960s assassinations turns out to be, in many ways, the most complex, certainly, the most bizarre. The apparent simplicity is but the largest illusion, resting on a foundation of smaller ones created by conspiratorial design and official malfeasance. Another striking difference in the RFK case is that because of the illusion of simplicity and the extreme official secrecy, which strongly reinforced one another, the case did not enter its Warren Commission phase until 16 to 20 years after the crime. The Warren Commission released its report and 26 volumes of hearings and exhibits in 1964, 1 year after President Kennedy's death. This fueled further questioning and controversy. The record eventually showed that the Commission's work was seriously flawed. With the passage of the Freedom of Information Act in 1966, researchers successfully, albeit slowly, pursued the release of case files from the FBI, CIA and the Secret Service, as well as voluminous Warren Commission records not published in the 26 volumes. Challenges to the official findings escalated with each new release. In contrast, the official investigative agency in the RFK case, the Los Angeles Police Department, LAPD, steadfastly refused to release the summary report of its investigation, the analog to the Warren Commission report, until 1986, and the raw files were not released until 1988. In 1985-86, the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office, LADA, processed its files for public disclosure. In response to a Freedom of Information Act request by political scientist and RFK researcher Gregory Stone and myself, 32,000 previously unreleased documents were gradually made public between 1986 and the present. Finally, the raw data behind the official conclusions was accessible. Questions could no longer be convincingly dismissed by officials and the media as being uninformed. The official conclusions could be judged on the basis of the case record rather than what officials claimed about the record. For nearly 2 decades, Los Angeles authorities had defended their findings by referring to a mountain of data that they refused to release. By 1988, with the vast majority of the documents disclosed, public debate and discussion about the RFK case finally, belatedly entered its Warren Commission era. By integrating the released files with the energetic investigative efforts of a handful of journalists, scholars and citizens, and through my own RFK investigation, it is now possible to come much closer to the truth than official investigators have done. This case is not an open and shut, one-man job. It is in the disclosure of LAPD, LADA and FBI files was due to the efforts of a rather small but dedicated group of people, journalists, scholars, politicians, concerned citizens, who exerted legal, political, and administrative pressure. Gregory Stone and Paul Scrade, a friend of Senator Kennedy and a shooting victim in the assassination, played prominent roles in this process. Unsolved conspiracy, as many people have speculated early on, without benefit of official files or much of the data that follows. Moreover, the RFK assassination is a conspiracy that employed one of the most complex, sophisticated and chilling of methods, one that surely has been refined by its practitioners since 1968, the hypnotically programmed assassin. In 1968, the majority of experts, scholars and media analysts deemed this modus operandi impossible, a fictional scenario that grossly exaggerated the mind control potential of hypnosis. Today we know better. What follows is more than the story of a complex conspiracy. It is also a portrait of law enforcement at its worst. This crime was covered up more by the Los Angeles Police and District Attorney's Office than by the conspirators. The trail of suppressed or destroyed evidence and intimidated witnesses is a long one, manifesting a new, outrageous twist for virtually every year in the more than 2 decades since the killing. The impetus for the cover-up came mainly from political pressures, internal and external to those of law enforcement agencies, to settle the case quickly and credibly. There were also bureaucracy/law enforcement pressures to prevent the chosen solution from unraveling. For over 20 years, Los Angeles authorities have behaved, in this case, more like totalitarian ministers of propaganda than publicly elected or appointed stewards of the criminal justice system. In the process of defending officially defined truth, a bunker mentality developed. At times, as we shall hear in their own words, the authorities seemed to succumb to a paranoia in which their critics were viewed as the ultimate evil, and were pursued more zealously than possible conspirators. The RFK case is touted by most Los Angeles officials as LA law's finest hour, a competent, thorough and efficient response to a national tragedy, a response that is a model for crisis management. Apparently having avoided the mistakes of the Dallas police in the JFK case, they claim to have performed an exemplary national service. In reality, the performance of the LAPD and the DAS office is so stunningly deficient that the question leaps out as to whether this was caused by the unique pressures of the case, or whether this was, or is, business as usual in Los Angeles. We should all hope that these agencies do not operate at anything approaching this dismal level of performance when dealing with the all too numerous homicides that plague the City of Angels in any given year. The disarray of this case could not be more profound. Because there were too many bullets fired to be accounted for by Sirhan's gun, and because the official trajectories are grossly in error, it is an open question as to whether it was Sirhan's bullets or someone else's that killed Robert F. Kennedy. That Sirhan was manipulated or assisted by an attractive young woman, who was also present at the scene of the crime, as yet unidentified, is now in the realm of probability rather than possibility. That Sirhan was hypnotically programmed to attack Kennedy seems certain, as you will soon see. We must now discard the officially sanctioned illusions created by conspiracy and cover-up and proceed to the disconcerting reality of the truth behind the assassination of Senator Robert F. Kennedy. Assassination is everybody all right. Robert F. Kennedy to busboy Juan Romero as Kennedy lay mortally wounded. The year 1968 is arguably the most politically chaotic and violent year in the last quarter century of American politics. A country bitterly divided over the Vietnam War had witnessed the abdication of the once popular President Lyndon Johnson, the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., demonstrations and riots requiring the National Guard to enter dozens of American cities. Then Robert Kennedy was struck down in his moment of political triumph, shattering the hopes of millions of Americans. The California primary, with its richest of prizes, 174 delegates to the National Convention, winner-take-all, was a make-or-break race for the RFK campaign. The week before the June 4 California contest, Kennedy had suffered his first electoral defeat, losing the Oregon primary to Senator Eugene McCarthy in a bitter fight. The loss ended the seemingly magical string of political victories by John, Robert and Ted Kennedy, at the local, state and national levels. While Kennedy was racking up primary victories, appealing directly to the voters, Vice President Hubert Humphrey was locking up delegates the old-fashioned way through caucuses and conventions controlled by state party organizations loyal to Johnson and Humphrey. It would be an uphill battle for Kennedy to pry loose enough delegates at the Chicago convention to win the nomination, but it was surely possible given the momentum of a victory in the nation's last and biggest primary. Many of Kennedy's friends and foes alike believed he would overtake Humphrey, who was saddled with the albatross of being closely identified with Johnson's unpopular Vietnam policy, and believed Kennedy would go on to beat Nixon in the general election, as his brother had done only 8 years earlier. The jubilant crowd of 1,800 Kennedy supporters, a crowd atypically youthful and glitzy, with disproportionate numbers of Hollywood celebrities and students, packed the embassy ballroom of the Ambassador Hotel. Robert Kennedy's charisma was very much in evidence as he looked out over the sea of straw hats, balloons and smiling faces. He flashed his boyish smile, gave a victory sign and urged, "On to Chicago and let's win there." The exhausted candidate stepped away from the podium amidst a clamorous ovation. He had one more performance to give, a meeting with print reporters to be held in the Colonial Room. To get there, and to avoid the crush of the frenzied victory crowd, he was scheduled to take the back way, avoiding the main ballroom by going backstage through the food preparation area, the pantry or kitchen area. As was typical of this presidential campaign, security was minimal, to say the least. There was no Secret Service protection for Robert Kennedy. This would not be legislated until after his death, when an assault on a presidential candidate was finally made a federal offense. No Los Angeles police were present at the hotel, even though 3 election night parties involving several thousand people were being held. On duty were 10 plainclothes hotel security personnel and 8 armed, uniformed guards hired by the hotel from Ace Guard Service. There was also Kennedy's personal bodyguard, ex-FBI agent Bill Barry. Early celebrities Roosevelt Grier, a former Los Angeles Rams lineman, and Rafer Johnson, Olympic decathlon champ, functioned as unofficial bodyguards as well as campaigners. Compared to the present, security was exceedingly lax. Entry badges were not effectively controlled, no metal detectors or cordons kept crowds back, no security personnel constantly surrounded the protectee while scanning for suspicious behavior or sudden movement. This was a campaign in which the candidate frequently waded into crowds with nothing or no one between him and them. No bulletproof vest, no phalanx of security men. Zealous admirers tore at his garments, tousled his hair, slapped his back and made off with his cufflinks. As he left the podium in the embassy room, Kennedy at first headed forward toward the crowd. Someone in his entourage could be heard to say, "This way, Senator." Despite subsequent speculation about conspiratorial manipulation or an unlucky, spontaneous change of route, the plan was for the senator to exit via the pantry. Some persons in Kennedy's entourage may have been confused about the route, but hotel security had been informed earlier in the evening that the candidate would exit the stage as he had entered the back way. Dozens of people, busboys, waiters, campaign workers, waited in the pantry and in the corridor leading to it, positioning themselves for a handshake or a close-up view. One young man had been in the pantry on several occasions during the late evening, before the speech ended around midnight. LA had been asked to leave by a Kennedy staffer, because he did not have a kitchen uniform or a campaign badge. But he had returned. According to busboy Jesus Perez, Sirhan had asked, more than once, if Kennedy would be passing through the pantry. Now the thin, 5'6", dark-featured young man stood in a corner of the room near a stack of serving trays, a .22 pistol concealed under his shirt and jacket. Kennedy's entourage spread out as it made its way down the corridor toward the fairly small, crowded pantry. Ethel Kennedy trailed some distance behind her husband. Hotelmater D. Carl Luker led the senator through the crowd. Police would later estimate that 77 persons were jammed into the immediate area, the pantry and the adjoining corridors. Smiling and nodding, the tired victor worked his way through the room toward the exit. He stopped to shake hands with busboys Jesus Perez and Juan Romero, who stood near the edge of a steam table about 2/3 of the way toward the exit. Balloons that had floated in or been carried in from the ballroom popped underfoot. Radio and TV reporters navigated through the pantry with their equipment shut down, assuming that there would not be anything newsworthy to record in this small, dimly lit area that offered nothing more exciting than the campaign's 10,000th handshake. Uniformed security guard Thane Eugene Caesar walked with Kennedy, slightly behind him and to his right. Caesar was close enough to touch the senator's left arm. For reasons of political image, the Kennedy campaign had specifically requested of the hotel that no uniformed security personnel be near the senator during his appearance. Mater D. Uker was leading Kennedy through the crowd. He glanced back at the senator, who had just shaken hands with busboy Juan Romero. "Let's go, Senator," Uker said in his thick German accent. He took Kennedy's right wrist and led him forward. Paul Scrate of the United Auto Workers Union was Kennedy's friend and served as labor coordinator for the California campaign. Now Scrade followed a few feet behind Kennedy and watched him shaking hands with the kitchen workers. He remembers that this seems symbolic of the campaign, and he recalls thinking to himself, this is really what this campaign is all about. We're going to have a president, finally. One San Diego high school student, Lisa Urso, had worked for Kennedy. Now, seeking escape from the heat in the crowded embassy room, she stood near the pantry exit and watched as the senator came toward her. With an unobstructed view, she saw Kennedy shaking hands with the busboy. Suddenly, she felt a shove from behind. Urso noticed a young man a lot shorter than me, she told this author later. Sirhan stepped in front of her and moved to her right. I thought it was gonna be a waiter, and it looked like he was trying to get in there and shake the senator's hand. Then she saw his arm move quickly across his body and down. And I froze. Instinctively, she had a feeling that this young man was going to shoot Kennedy. Busboy Juan Romero and waiter Martin Petrisky also saw Sirhan approach. They, too, at first thought he was going to shake hands, in part because he was smiling. The smile was betrayed by Sirhan's words, "Kennedy, you son of a bitch." In a horrible sequence of visions burned indelibly into her psyche, Urso saw Sirhan, who was now standing about 5 feet in front of Kennedy, raise the gun. I saw the flash from the gun, and then I saw the senator. He went forward, then moved backward, grabbed his head and fell backward. It was a jerking motion, forward about a foot, then backward onto the floor. Paul Scrade was shot in the forehead, apparently very early in the erupting gunfire. He saw neither the gun nor Sirhan and didn't know what had happened, that anyone had been shot. In 1986, Scrade publicly described the traumatic event for the first time. I began violently shaking. I thought that I was being electrocuted. There were TV cameras and wires on the floor, and so I thought that's what had happened. 2 shots went off very near Carl Wecker's face. He felt Kennedy's hand slip from his grasp. Immediately, Uker grabbed the gun and forced it down and away from the senator, toward the surface of the steam table. The shooting stopped for just a moment, Uker testified at the trial, but then, I felt him shooting. Uker was joined by a pile of flailing bodies attempting to wrestle the weapon from the assailant's hand. The struggle was successful, but not before the gun was emptied, wounding 4 other people besides Kennedy and Scrade. All would recover, except Kennedy. The senator was shot 3 times, 1 bullet entered his head behind his right ear. According to several witnesses, Kennedy reeled backward and put his hands up toward his head as if to protect himself. Now he lay on his back, limbs awkwardly spread-eagled, a widening pool of blood near his right ear. A cacophony of screams, tearful cries, obscenities and pleas for help engulfed the room as pandemonium took over. The assailant was being held by bystanders who were waiting for police to arrive. Numerous persons rushed out to find medical help. Juan Romero cradled Kennedy's head in his right hand. "Come on, Mr. Kennedy. You can make it." Kennedy's lips moved. "Is everybody all right?" he asked. A young man gave rosary beads to Romero, who wrapped them in Kennedy's left hand. The senator clutched them to his chest. Ethel Kennedy appeared. She pushed Romero aside and talked soothingly to her wounded husband. The confusion at the crime scene has typically been understated. This was not an event witnessed by 70 people who were watching Kennedy at center stage and suddenly saw him attacked. Many people did not see the shooting at all. Many thought, at first, that there was a harmless eruption of bursting balloons or firecrackers. Some saw Kennedy reel or fall but had no view of the gun or the assailant. Some saw Sirhan but not his gun, and vice versa. Some bystanders knew there was gunfire not by seeing Sirhan or Kennedy but by seeing one of the other 5 victims falling or bleeding. Some tried to rush out to avoid being gunned down, some to find help, others to chase persons they thought were escaping suspects. The uneven quantity and quality of eyewitness observations of this crime would contribute to its scrambled image. And there would be no video or photographic record of the actual shooting to clarify that image. Dr. Stanley Abo, a medical practitioner who had been in the assassination crowd at the hotel, now entered the kitchen and knelt beside Kennedy. He found the victims breathing quite shallow. He probed the head wound with his finger in order to relieve cranial pressure by making it bleed. Kennedy spoke to Ethel. The senator was taken to Good Samaritan Hospital, where he fought for his life as a team of 6 surgeons labored to remove the bullet lodged in his brain. Had he survived, nerve and motor function damage to his vision, hearing and muscular control would have left him severely impaired. At 1:44 p.m. on June 6, Robert F. Kennedy died. Press Secretary Frank Mankiewicz announced the news to a nation benumbed by political violence. Kennedy's death had a profound impact on the presidential race of 1968 and, quite probably, on several races beyond. For one, it profoundly altered the internal alignment of the Democratic Party and its issue positions. It also had a more subtle yet equally profound effect on the psyches of millions of Americans. For them, this trilogy of tragedy in the 1960s was a dominant influence on their political thinking for the decades that followed. As Jack Newfield poignantly described in the last paragraph of his book Robert F. Kennedy, a memoir, and now I realized what makes our generation unique, what defines us apart from those who came before the hopeful winter of 1961, and those who came after the murderous spring of 1968. We are the first generation that learned from experience, in our innocent 20s, that things were not really getting better, that we shall not overcome. We felt, by the time we reached 30, that we had already glimpsed the most compassionate leaders our nation could produce, and they had all been assassinated. And from this time forward, things would get worse. Our best political leaders were part of memory now, not hope. The stone was at the bottom of the hill and we were alone. Open and shut, it was an open and shut murder case. We were probably more cautious than with any other case in the history of the department. Former LA Police Chief Ed Davis, 1988. My feeling is that when they found Sirhan's diary and they read it, I think that everybody was ready to hang their hat on that and say, okay, it was only one guy alone by himself, for whatever his reasons might have been, and let's quit beating the bushes and wrap things up. They probably should not have done that. They should have continued to resolve all matters and issues. Retired FBI agent William Bailey, assigned to the RFK case, 19,771. Los Angeles law enforcement's rallying cry for this investigation was not search for conspirators or pursue every lead but, not another Dallas. This meant keeping the suspect alive, getting a conviction, and presenting a credible public image. To handle the case, the department created Special Unit Senator, SUS, a task force with its own personnel and command structure. According to press releases, Lab D SUS investigators conducted nearly 4,000 interviews. Data and progress report. According to press releases, Lab D SUS investigators conducted nearly 4,000 interviews. Data and progress reports flowed into the DAS office, building a solid case against Sirhan. The investigation, whose flaws and cover-ups will be analyzed in subsequent chapters, concluded that there was no second gun, no female accomplice, and no conspiracy. As we shall see, LAPD worked hard to debunk every lead to a possible conspiracy, through a process that often resembled a political campaign more than an orthodox police investigation. Except for a handful of skeptical journalists and citizens, there was no one to challenge the department's methods or findings. The vast majority of the press and public assumed Sirhan was guilty, that he acted for political reasons, that he was mentally unstable, and, as the investigation and trial unfolded, that he acted alone. The police were wedded to the lone assassin conclusion. Almost instantly, Sirhan's lawyers had no interest in challenging that finding. It would be much harder to successfully plead diminished capacity and lack of premeditation if he had been involved with others. Since the police told the prosecutors that no one else was involved, they could concentrate on their main goal of sending Sirhan to the gas chamber and not have to worry about the legal complexities of a conspiracy. At a press conference following a pre-trial hearing, defense lawyer Russell Parsons pronounced, "We have seen no evidence of a conspiracy." An LA Herald headline the following day announced, "Both sides agree Sirhan acted alone." One of the widely misunderstood aspects of this case is the scope of Sirhan's trial. It is generally assumed that all of the evidentiary conflicts and issues the possibility of a second gun, the eyewitness accounts that challenged whether it was physically possible for Sirhan to have inflicted Kennedy's wounds were addressed at the trial. Surely, the point goes, Sirhan's lawyers would have pounced at any chance to create doubt in the minds of the jurors a la Perry Mason. Instead, most of the evidence was stipulated by both the defense 24 HRS. After the crime, LAPD Chief Tom Redden told the world, "As near as we can tell, there was only one person, and this information has been gleaned from dozens of interviews." Redden dismissed a police all-points bulletin for additional suspects as the meaningless product of great pandemonium and prosecution. Evidentiary conflicts that raised doubts about the lone gun conclusion or about Sirhan's role were either excluded from the courtroom or ignored, floating over the heads of jurors without discussion or debate. The defense stipulated that Sirhan killed Robert F. Kennedy. Virtually the only area of contention was the perpetrator's state of mind. Was this a premeditated first-degree crime punishable by death, as the prosecution contended, or was it the spontaneous act of a psychologically disturbed young man who was not responsible for his actions? The trial was not about the number of shots fired or whether Sirhan could have shot Kennedy behind the right ear while standing in front of him. It was about Sirhan's psyche. Fittingly, it was not a battle of ballistics experts or conflicting eyewitnesses but of dueling psychiatrists armed with ink blot tests and psychological profiles. Thus, when prosecution star witness Carl Uecker testified that he grabbed Sirhan's gun and forced it away from Kennedy after the second shot, Kennedy was wounded 3 times and a 4th shot passed through his coat, it caused not a ripple. When LAPD criminologist Dwayne Wolfer introduced the wrong gun into Evie Not Dents as the murder weapon instead of Sirhan's gun, and proceeded to testify that all recovered bullets could be matched to that gun, to the exclusion of every other gun in the world, no one noticed. When dozens of witness reports and trial testimonies placed Sirhan's gun several feet in front of Kennedy, while coroner Thomas Noguchi testified that RFK was shot behind the right ear with the weapon as close as 1 inch away, the discrepancy slid by unexplored. In fact, it was the defense that cut Noguchi's testimony short, contending that the coroner did not have to get into the gory details about the precise location of wounds and the angle and distance of firing. This trial was adversarial only within very narrowly defined limits involving motive and mentality. LAPD's conclusions, its methods and its competence were not tested in an adversarial proceeding before the judge and jury. Even with what seemed like a rather tame defense for Sirhan and with a police department that covered up or neglected trouble. Some areas of the case, even with all the stipulations about the hard evidence and about guilt, the police and DA's office still played hardball with Sirhan's lawyers, not wanting anything to jeopardize a murder-1 verdict. Chief Defense Attorney Grant Cooper and his assistant Russell Parsons decided on a diminished capacity plea in order to avoid the death penalty. The defense tried, apparently not very forcefully, to obtain crucial audio tapes of Sirhan's interrogation sessions with police during the early morning hours following his arrest. The defense hoped the tapes would reveal a spaced-out, disoriented prisoner exhibiting mental incoherence. LAPD was vague in its responses to the defense about where the tapes resided. The defense apparently never obtained them but instead had to settle for interviews with interrogating officers, who described Sirhan's behavior and demeanor. Assistant DA John Howard sat in on these interviews and challenged the defense investigators' right to ask certain questions concerning Sirhan's appearance, thereby effectively limiting the scope of the inquiry. Police inaccurately characterized Sirhan's behavior, ignoring his bizarre breathing, strange speech pattern and the near incoherence manifested during his first interrogation session. The defense enlisted Manhattan attorney Emil Zola Berman, who argued the diminished capacity defense to the jury. The killing was unplanned, undeliberate, impulsive, Berman asserted, and without premeditation or malice, totally the product of a sick, obsessed mind and personality. The prosecution rebutted with evidence of premeditation. 15 witnesses had seen Sirhan at the San Gabriel Valley Gun Club on the morning and afternoon of June 4. He was rapid-firing his .22 pistol target practicing for the kill, the prosecution implied. Sirhan was seen at the Ambassador Hotel on June 2 when Kennedy made an appearance there. He admitted being there. It seemed as if he might be stalking his target, although Sirhan denied it. When arrested after the shooting, he had in his pocket a newspaper clipping criticizing RFK for opposing the Vietnam War while favoring military aid to Israel. In the minds of jurors, this reinforced both political motive and premeditation. But the coup de grace of premeditation was the notebook found by police in Sirhan's bedroom at his mother's house in Pasadena. The authorities would label this item his diary. While its mysterious origin and content will be discussed later, its impact on the trial is not in doubt. There were 2 pages containing repetitive, scrawled references to killing RFK. The most damning read, May 18, 9:45 a.m.-68. My determination to eliminate RFK is becoming more the more sick of an unshakable obsession. RFK must die. Sirhan admitted writing the diary and shooting Kennedy, but he claimed he could not remember doing either. Even under hypnosis his memory blacked out when it came to both writing and shooting. Sirhan had practiced self-hypnosis and was keenly interested in mind control and mental projection. Defense psychiatrist Dr. Bernard Diamond argued that the accused was in a trance during the shooting, a trance accidentally self-induced. Sirhan, Diamond argued, had become mesmerized by the sparkling chandeliers and huge mirrors in the crowded hotel, fitting the profile of an excellent hypnotic subject. He had slipped into a trance and become disassociated from reality. However, Diamond's soliloquy to the jury on diminished capacity triggered by an accidental trance seemed to imply a strange form of premeditation. Sirhan had programmed himself for the assassination. I see Sirhan as small and helpless, pitifully ill, with a demented, psychotic rage, out of control of his own consciousness and his own actions, subject to some bizarre, disassociated trances in some of which he programmed himself to be the instrument of assassination, and then, in an almost emphasis-added accidentally induced twilight state, he actually executed the crime, knowing next to nothing as to what was happening. Sirhan was not at all helpful to his own defense. He took on the role of a political prisoner at a show trial, the Arab hero who killed Kennedy on behalf of oppressed Palestinians. He lectured from the witness stand on the violence and exploitation visited on his homeland, Palestine, by the Israelis. Before his family immigrated to the United States, he had witnessed Middle Eastern violence firsthand, massacres and bombings. His younger brother was crushed by a truck in a gun battle between Arabs and Israelis. Sirhan testified that anything that has to do with Israel or Zionists or support of Israel, that is enough cause for me, sir, to hate him. RFK. The alleged flashpoint came when Kennedy endorsed the sale of 50 U.S. Phantom jets to Israel. At one point in the trial, the rather defiant Arab hero attempted to fire his lawyers, take over his own case and withdraw his plea of diminished capacity. I will ask to be executed, Sirhan told the court. Judge Herbert V. Walker demanded a reason. I killed Robert Kennedy willfully, premeditatedly, with 20 years of forethought. That's why. Judge Walker refused to accept Sirhan's new plea, but the jury refused to accept his old one of diminished capacity. Sirhan was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. The California Supreme Court upheld the conviction, but the U.S. Supreme Court voided the constitutionality of the death penalty before Sirhan could be executed. He is now eligible for parole. It was also straightforward, a legal exercise in which the crime and the evidence were stipulated by everyone involved, including the defendant, who seemed compelled to make the prosecutor's case for them. The open and shut investigation led to an open and shut trial. The only door that did not shut on cue was that of the gas chamber at San Quentin prison. The profound discrepancies and conflicts in the evidence were suppressed or ignored by LAPD and were never addressed by the judicial process, but they did not go away. They surfaced unevenly over the coming months and years. Still, Los Angeles authorities would have it both ways. Having avoided dealing with the conflicting evidence during the investigation and trial, they would, for over 2 decades, staunchly insist that the investigation and trial had resolved everything. Worst of all, the ploy was largely successful and the public still does not have satisfactory answers to the glaring conflicts in the physical evidence. Conflicting evidence. Eyewitnesses are notoriously unreliable, but this time the sheer unanimity was too phenomenal to dismiss. Not a single witness in that crowded kitchen had seen Sirhan fire behind Kennedy's ear at point-blank range. Coroner Thomas Noguchi, from his book Coroner, 1983, for a case allegedly so simple, the conflicts in the evidence were indeed glaring, although ignored by the authorities and the media. Prosecution star witness Carl Uecker offered grand jury testimony consistent with what he had told police and the FBI. He grabbed Sirhan's gun after the second shot, moving it away from Kennedy. Yet the senator was wounded 3 times and a 4th shot passed through the right sleeve of his suit coat. Another close-up eyewitness, Assistant Major D. Edward Manasian, confirmed that Uecker had deflected the gun before a 3rd shot was fired. Manasian told LAPD within hours of the shooting, I saw the first 2 shots fired. At that time Uecker hit his arm and grabbed his neck, pulled around his neck, and then I grabbed him from the left side. In addition, there was the distance problem, as it came to be known, constituting one of the most fundamental conflicts in the evidence, a conflict between what the eyewitnesses saw and the data provided by the autopsy and powder burn tests. On June 11, LAPD test fired a gun identical to Sirhan's into clothing similar to Kennedy's and into pig's ears used to simulate human flesh. The dark, well-defined burn, a tattooing effect, found on Kennedy's head and clothing could only be replicated if the gun was fired nearly point-blank. LAPD concluded that the bullet which entered behind Senator Kennedy's right ear was fired at a muzzle distance of approximately 1 inch. This confirmed the findings from Coroner Thomas Noguchi's autopsy. The nitrite deposits and powder burns on the body indicated conclusively that the shots were fired from very close range. Dr. Noguchi testified that the fatal bullet entered between 1 to 1.5 inches from the edge of the ear and that the other wounds were inflicted from a distance of contact to 1 inch. According to a 1974 article in the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, which quoted Noguchi, he was approached by an unnamed assistant DA before entering the grand jury room and was asked to change his distance finding from 1 to 3 inches to 1 to 3 feet. It is easy to understand the reason for such a request. The powder burn test and autopsy findings sharply conflict with the accounts of virtually every eyewitness, including those who, according to the FBI, were described by LAPD as the prosecution's 5 best witnesses: Uker, Petrisky, Burns, Romero, Perez. The witnesses placed the gun 1.5 to 6 feet from Kennedy, not point blank as the technical physical evidence had concluded. Frank Burns, now a successful Los Angeles attorney, worked for the Kennedy campaign in his capacity as an aide to the politically powerful Jesse Unruh. Unruh, nicknamed Big Daddy, was Speaker of the California Assembly and a staunch Kennedy backer. Burns was within several feet of Kennedy when the shots were fired. In a 1987 interview with the author, he vividly recalled the tragedy that was still painful for him to talk about. He was certain that Surin's gun was never anywhere near contact with Kennedy's head. It was several feet away, he adamantly asserted. We're talking several feet. Burns said it might have been as many as 6 feet, but he would have to see a diagram to clarify his estimate. Later he reconstructed the crime in his spacious and richly appointed office, using this author and chairs as stand-ins for the principals. He positioned the gun approximately 3 to 4 feet from Kennedy's head. Burns was extremely confident that his positioning of the stand-ins and the distance it created was accurate. It is one of the elements of the shooting that the guarded, precision-oriented barrister told me he is most certain of. Waiter Martin Petrisky, who said he was 3 to 4 feet from Kennedy, asserted that the gun never got closer than 3 feet. And busboy Juan Romero told authorities the weapon was approximately 1 yard from the senator's head. Carl Uker is perhaps the best witness because of his consistency and credibility, and because his visual estimate of the distance is bolstered by his sense of touch. He testified that the gun was 1.5 to 2 feet away. Uker had reached behind him and grasped the senator's right wrist, leading him forward, when the gun was fired near the maitre d's face. In 1971 Uker asserted, "There's no way that the shots described in the autopsy could have come from Surin's gun. Sirhan never got close enough for a point-blank shot. Never." Beyond the 5 best witnesses, newspaper reporter Pete Hamill, who was present during the shooting, placed the gun at least 2 feet from the senator. Co-ed campaigner Valeria Schultz said it was 3 yards away. Security guard Thane Caesar, 2 feet. Assistant Maitre d' Edward Manasian placed the barrel approximately 3 feet from Kennedy. Vincent Dipierou, who got Kennedy's blood sprayed on his glasses, told the grand jury the gun was 4 to 6 feet away. To TV producer Richard Lubick was walking behind and to the right of Uker. When he knelt to the floor after Kennedy went down, he got the senator's blood on his pants. Surin's gun was 2 to 3 feet from Kennedy's head, Lubick insisted in a 1975 interview. Lisa Urso, a key witness whose vivid account of her unobstructed view of the shooting was suppressed by Los Angeles authorities, reported to me that the gun was 3 to 6 feet from Kennedy when she saw the first flash from the barrel of Surin's gun that seemed to come from the first shot. Grand jury or trial testimony never placed the gun closer than 1.5 to 6 feet. The only witness to do so was LA Times photographer Boris Yarrow, who said it was inside a foot. But Yarrow was viewing the shooting through his camera lens, although not taking pictures, which may have distorted the distances. In his original interviews and testimonies in 1968 and in subsequent interviews with authorities and journalists during the next few years, Carl Uker clearly asserted that Sirhan did not get around him or past him to reach Kennedy at point-blank range. Sirhan was trapped between the steam table on his right and Uker on his front left. Uker told LAPD just hours after the shooting, "LAPD, did Sirhan get past you?" Wecker, "He was right in front of me." The best evidence is that Surin's gun never got farther than the forward edge of the steam table on which his gun hand was later bashed by Uker. Frank Burns told me in 1987, "I remember precisely where the gun was when I first saw it. As the first shots went off, it was at the edge of the steam table." Even the official LAPD crime scene diagrams place Kennedy's forward progress at no more than 2 to 3 feet from the forward edge of the steam table. Had the autopsy and powder burn data conflicted with only some of the witnesses rather than virtually all, or had the discrepancy been 2 feet compared to 3 feet instead of contact to 1.5 inches versus 1.5 feet to 6 feet, the problem would not be as glaring and serious. But officials dealt with the big flaw in their case by ignoring it. When LA District Attorney Yvel Younger was asked about this important discrepancy, he gave Ms. Urso's bizarre treatment as a witness as described in Chapter 8. The following incredible reply: if somebody says 1 inch and somebody else says 2 inches, that's a discrepancy. But the jury didn't think it was a significant discrepancy, and neither did I. 3. In addition to problems concerning distance and whether Sirhan could get off more than 2 shots at Kennedy, there were problems regarding the angle, the front-rear dimension and the pattern of the wounds. The autopsy revealed 3 wounds, one behind the right ear, a second near the right armpit, a third 1.5 inches below the second. A fourth bullet pierced the right rear shoulder area of Kennedy's suit coat. All bullets entered at fairly steep upward angles and their direction was slightly right to left. All also entered from the right rear of Kennedy's body, not the front or side. This is clearly illustrated in the accompanying LAPD photos. A detective is wearing Kennedy's coat, and metal wires have been placed through the bullet holes in order to show the trajectories of 2 of the 4 shots. Witnesses disagree on whether Sirhan shot at Kennedy while the senator was turned to his left shaking hands with a busboy, or after the handshake had finished and he was walking forward. For example, Lisa Urso, a very credible witness, believes that Kennedy was turned toward his left and shaking hands when Sirhan fired the first shots. In contrast, Uker insists that he had taken Kennedy's wrist and looked back to see him moving forward. I heard the first shot and the second shot right after that, Uker told the grand jury, and Mr. Kennedy fell out of my hand. I lost his hand. Juan Romero told the FBI and LAPD that the handshake had finished and Kennedy had then taken 2 or 3 steps forward when the shooting started. Romero also asserted during his June 5 LAPD interview that he was the last one to shake the senator's hand. Romero: I was right next to Kennedy when he just finished shaking my hand. LAPD: you are the one that he shook hands with just before he was shot. Romero: yes, sir. Corroborating Romero, waiter Martin Petrisky told the FBI that, after Senator Kennedy shook hands with Juan Romero, I noticed a man Sirhan pushing his way toward the senator and Carl Uker. In any event, we know that Sirhan approached from in front of Kennedy. The senator was either facing primarily forward, walking toward Sirhan, or had turned leftward to shake hands. Sirhan attacked from Uker's front left. Kennedy never turned his back to Sirhan, nor did the assailant have a path to Kennedy's right rear side, even if Kennedy was shaking hands. The best that an RFK turn to the left can accomplish for the official version is to allow Sirhan to inflict a wound in the senator's right temple or the side of his ear, discounting, for the moment, the distance problem, but this turn could not account for a bullet entering the head from behind the right ear. There are also problems concerning the angle and pattern of the wounds. To inflict the damage discovered by the autopsy, Sirhan would have had to move the gun and fire at Kennedy from 2 different levels, to account for the bullet behind the right ear and the lower shoulder or armpit, which none of the witnesses saw. Absent this latter movement of the gun, Kennedy would have had to be changing position while Sirhan was firing. Since the senator apparently fell backward, with his back away from Sirhan, and the angle of the wounds was upward, it would be impossible for Sirhan to have inflicted them unless he fired from his knees and somehow got access to Kennedy's back. In addition, there is the further complication created by Uker's undisputed deflection of the gun away from Kennedy after 2 shots. Though perspectives vary, witnesses are nearly unanimous in their agreement that Sirhan fired with an outstretched arm, with the gun generally parallel to the floor and perpendicular to Sirhan's face, not pointed downward or upward or moving up or down before Uker forced it away from Kennedy. Frank Bums is an exception to this agreement in testimonies. Bums told LAPD on June 5 that Sirhan was shooting downward, slightly downward as Kennedy was falling, and that the gun was at his, Bums, eye level. He told this author the same thing in 1987. One selective use of evidentiary logic employed by government officials has been to insist that there couldn't have been a second gun fired because someone would have seen it, ignoring that at least 3 witnesses did see another gun, which I will elaborate on later. LAPD officials use the fiction writer's prerogative of inventing something that no one saw, describing Sirhan, in their summary report, as lunging at Kennedy to get the gun at point-blank range. This distinctive lunge went unreported in eyewitness accounts. The previously described conflicts in the evidence would not be as disturbing if it weren't for a related problem, which is addressed in the next chapter: the overwhelming circumstantial evidence of too many bullets fired to be accounted for by one gun. This growing body of data supporting a second gun means that the various conflicts between the witnesses and the autopsy need not be resolved by determining whether the coroner or the bystanders are wrong. It is quite likely that both are correct, except for the specific issue over the distance of the gun when it was fired behind Kennedy's right ear. Despite the massaging and obfuscation of the coroner's report, the bullet to the senator's head was scientifically proven, by powder burn analysis, to have been fired inches or less away from the wound. Note: bullets. 2 guns. There were 8 bullets fired, 7 recovered, and there were never any more shots fired. That's a fact. Los Angeles District Attorney Joseph P. Bush, 1,974. 7 bullets were recovered from the bodies of Senator Kennedy and the 5 surviving shooting victims. 1 was allegedly lost in the ceiling interspace. Surin's gun held 8 shots, and he had no opportunity to reload. Thus, with all of Surin's 8 bullets otherwise accounted for, if but 1 bullet was recovered from the crime scene, it constitutes a 9th bullet too many for 1 gun. That much is agreed. The disagreement is whether the doorframe in the west end of the pantry did, in fact, contain a bullet or bullets. Before focusing on the extensive evidence of a 9th bullet, it should be recalled that even if we exclude this possibility, the official version is hard-pressed to provide a valid 1-gun accounting. It requires 3 bullets to perform double duty via trajectories that range from surprising to virtually impossible. According to LAPD criminologist Dwayne Wolfer, 1 bullet passed through Kennedy's suit coat, traveled upward at approximately an 80-degree angle, and struck Paul Scrade in the head. But the bullet passed back to front, and all eyewitnesses place Kennedy with his back or side to Scrade. Witnesses, including Scrade, place him 4 to 5 feet behind Kennedy. To fulfill Wolfer's scenario, Scrade would, in his words, have had to be 9 feet tall or have my head on Kennedy's shoulder. Another bullet is supposed to have gone cleanly through Ira Goldstein's pant leg, hit the cement floor, then deflected upward to lodge in Erwin Stroll's leg. But Goldstein testified to the grand jury that when the bullet passed through his pant leg, Stroll had already reacted to being hit and fallen to the floor. Elizabeth Evans is alleged by LAPD to have been wounded by a bullet that pierced a 1-inch thick ceiling tile, ricocheted off the inner ceiling, re-entered through the tile, and struck her in the head 5 feet from the point of re-entry from the ceiling. But the medical report on Mrs. Evans described the bullet as entering just below the hairline and traveling upward. She testified that when she was wounded, she was kneeling down to tie her shoe. Moreover, the hollow point bullet retained 3/4 of its original weight and did not fragment or mushroom. Thus it is at least a distant cousin of the magic bullet described by the Warren Commission as wounding both President Kennedy and Governor Connally. Further pressure was placed on the official accounting by the author's 1987 interview with Vincent DiPiero. The young hotel waiter had been standing only a few feet from Kennedy, near Scrade, when the shooting took place. Kennedy's blood splattered DiPiero's sweatshirt. When he washed the garment, which he showed to me, he discovered 2 small, well-defined holes in the upper left sleeve, holes which he asserts were not there previously. Indeed, their size, shape and alignment appear consistent with a .22 caliber slug having passed cleanly through. If it is a bullet hole, it constitutes yet a 3rd through-and-through shot in addition to Kennedy's suit coat and Goldstein's pants. To DiPiero, this was simply a graphic reminder of how close he came to being shot. But it also puts further strain on LAPD's ballistics accounting. While DiPiero's precise position and alignment can only be estimated, he was standing up and in Surin's line of fire. In order to avoid lodging in the wall or doorframe, a DiPiero through-and-through shot must end up in either of 2 shooting victims in William Weasel's stomach or Goldstein's hip. Otherwise, there were 2 guns. While such a trajectory cannot be discounted, it further illustrates the fragility of LAPD's 1-gun scenario. One also wonders if the left sleeve of Kennedy's coat, inexplicably missing, was purposely destroyed by those running the investigation because it contained yet another hole or holes, which even Wolfer's logically tortured trajectories could not account for. With 1 gun. Before considering the door frame evidence, there is the question of how many bullet holes were in the ceiling tiles. LAPD admits there were 3 holes. 3 is the limit that is possible for a single gun scenario, given the rest of the known damage that must be accounted for. In his book Special Unit Senator, LAPD Deputy Chief Robert Houghton quotes Wolfer as saying, "It's unbelievable how many holes there are in the kitchen ceiling. If there are more than 3, then it is the 1-gun conclusion that becomes unbelievable." A police property report, curiously dated 22 days after the property was booked into evidence, describes 2 ceiling tiles removed. LAPD crime scene photos show that numerous ceiling tiles were removed, including several which are outside of Surin's officially defined range of fire, outside of Wolfer's trajectory reconstructions. At the crime scene, most witnesses were removed from the pantry area and put in holding rooms to await interview. But eyewitness Lisa Urso was wandering around the hotel and was not discovered by authorities until later in the morning. She described to the author what she saw in the pantry when she returned there. Within 3 hours after the crime, Urso recalled that just after the shooting, before she left the pantry and went upstairs, she looked up at the ceiling and was surprised to see what appeared to be bullet holes. She doesn't remember how many. When she returned to the pantry several hours later, there was still blood on the floor, and the room was bustling with activity all over the place. She noticed that tiles had been removed from the ceiling and placed on the floor 5 or 6, she estimates. A uniformed police officer stood guard while another was kneeling, poking the tiles for bullets, she thought. She looked down at 2 of the panels that were nearest her and saw several holes in one, 3, she thinks, and a single hole in the other. She does not recall seeing the doorframe, located at the other end of the pantry, being dismantled or probed, but she does recall that there was activity in virtually every area of the room. Said Urso, I don't know how many rounds a gun holds, but it sounded like there were more people shot than there were bullets to go around. And the police kept saying about ricochets. From 1969 to the present, a cumulative and extensive body of evidence indicates that 1 or more bullets were found in the doorframe. Recall that since all 8 bullets from Surin's 8-shot revolver are otherwise accounted for by being found in the victims' bodies, with 1 allegedly being lost in the ceiling, any bullet in the doorframe is proof that 2 guns were fired. 3 photos of holes in the doorframe, released by the FBI in 1976 under a Freedom of Information Act request, describe bullet holes. 1 describes a bullet mark. There are 4 separate holes labeled as bullet holes. LAPD crime scene photos show Wolfer pointing to a spot on the upper doorframe. In a 1971 deposition he stated, "We wouldn't photograph just any hole. I mean, there were too many holes to photograph." He also asserted that he was in charge of the crime scene and I recovered the bullets that were recovered. Los Angeles coroner Dr. Thomas Noguchi is shown in a police photo pointing to 2 holes in the doorframe. The holes are circled. Inside one circle is what appears to be a law officer's badge number. In a 1975 affidavit given to attorney Vincent Bugliosi, the Charles Manson prosecutor who was independently re-investigating the RFK case, Noguchi described the context of the photo. I asked Mr. Wolfer where he had found bullet holes at the scene. I forget what he said, but when I asked him this question, he pointed, as I recall, to 1 hole in a ceiling panel above and an indentation in the cement ceiling. He also pointed to several holes in the door frames of the swinging doors leading into the pantry. I directed that photographs be taken of me pointing to these holes. 1 Los Angeles police officers Robert Rossi and Charles Wright are shown in an AP photo kneeling near a hole in the doorframe, pointing to the hole and illuminating it with flashlights. See photo/document section. The caption reads, "Police technician inspects a bullet hole discovered in a doorframe. Bullet is still in the wood." In 1975 Bugliosi obtained an affidavit from Rossi. Sometime during the evening when we were looking for evidence, someone discovered what appeared to be a bullet 1.5 feet or so from the bottom of document section. The caption read what appeared to be a bullet 1.5 feet or so from the bottom of the floor in a door jamb on the door behind the stage. I also personally observed what I believed to be a bullet in the place just mentioned. What I observed was a hole in the door jamb, and the base of what appeared to be a small caliber bullet was lodged in the hole. Bugliosi then telephoned Rossi's partner, Officer Charles Wright, who confirmed that the hole contained a bullet. According to Bugliosi, Wright said that the bullet was definitely removed from the hole, but I don't know who did it. Bugliosi asserts that Wright subsequently refused to confirm the telephone conversation or to provide a statement and insisted that a city attorney be present. During their meeting, another Bugliosi obtained affidavit came from ambassador waiter and crime scene witness Martin Petrisky. One of the officers pointed to 2 circled holes on the center divider of the swinging doors and told us that they had dug 2 bullets out of the center divide. The 2 circled holes are shown in a photograph shown to me by Mr. Bugliosi. I am absolutely sure that the police told us that 2 bullets were dug out of these holes. On the morning of June 5, 1968, 2 amateur photographers, John Shirley and John R. Clementi, took pictures of the pantry that included the door frame. In March 1969, Shirley provided a statement to the late Lillian Castellano, the courageous and energetic force behind the Kennedy Assassination Truth Committee. Small band of citizens seeking answers to the questions and conflicts raised in the unsupportable official conclusions. Said Shirley, in the wooden jamb of the center divider were 2 bullet holes surrounded by ink circles which contain some numbers and letters. I remember a manager pointing out those particular marked bullet holes to another person, who appeared to be a press photographer. It appeared that an attempt had been made to dig the bullets out from the surface. However, the center divider jamb was loose, and it appeared to have been removed from the framework so that the bullets might be extracted from behind. It also appeared to me that there was evidence that another bullet had hit one of the padded swinging doors. The men who helped authorities remove the wood were two carpenters employed by the hotel, Dale Poor and Wesley Harrington. In 1975 interviews conducted by the DAS office, the men described what they saw. Poor stated, "It looked like the bullet had went sick in at sort of an angle as it was traveling this way. So it made a bit of an oblong hole and the fiber of the board had closed in some after it went in. And that's the only reason I thought it had been a bullet went in there, because you put any kind of a metal instrument, punch nail sets, anything in the hole, it won't have a fiber around the edge." Harrington answered, "Q, would you be comfortable with using language that said they actually were bullet holes?" A. Yes. Yes. I would. During my teenage years, we had use of air rifles and .22 rifles, and we had fired into old buildings and trees, and this looked like a hole similar to a small caliber bullet. Q, and both holes appeared to be of that nature. Is that a fair statement? A. Yes. Yes. LA Law's response to the question of extra bullets was to conduct a continuous, systematic cover-up, engaging in destruction of evidence, conspiracy of silence, and disinformation. Early in 1969, Lillian Castellano and Floyd Nelson, both of the Kennedy Assassination Truth Committee, wrote an article in the LA Free Press highlighting circumstantial evidence of door frame bullets. Subsequently, on June 27, 1969, LAPD destroyed the ceiling tiles and door frame wood, in flagrant violation of the public's trust. This unbelievable destruction of evidence occurred while Surin's case was being appealed in the courts. The destruction was not revealed until 1975 during hearings conducted by the Los Angeles Police Commission regarding public disclosure of police files. A police spokesman informed the nation that the material was destroyed because it was too large to fit into a card file. This raises the question of whether LAPD also trashed all of the assorted rifles, bales of marijuana, or vehicles that constituted bulky material evidence in all of its cases on appeal in 1969, or was there some special reason that they wished this evidence to disappear? LAPD's subsequent, equally preposterous position, articulated by then Assistant Chief Daryl Gates, was that the destruction didn't matter because the artifacts contained no bullets and therefore were not evidence. This is the same Daryl Gates who was in charge of LAPD when the notorious brutal beating of the black motorist took place in March 1991. One would expect that any department whose publicly and privately pronounced goal was to avoid another dull knot law should have been overjoyed to preserve and release evidence that would refute crit CS and conspiracy nuts. Having destroyed the physical evidence, Los Angeles authorities proceeded to exercise damage control and to discredit the circumstantial evidence. Carpenters Harrington and Poor were referred to as laymen, not trained experts, and the Associated Press was making an erroneous assumption when it labeled the Razorite photo of the two officers and the hole in the door jamb as showing a bullet hole. In a 1985 conversation with this author, former FBI agent Roger Lignes put forth a new explanation for the confusion over extra bullets in the door jamb, mistaken photo labeling by his FBI colleagues. Lignes, who served as liaison between LAPD and the Bureau during the Kennedy case, is a staunch defender of the department's performance and conclusions. He still maintains close ties with LAPD and runs a private security firm in Los Angeles. He contends that Agent Alfred Grainer, whose captions on crime scene photos refer to bullet holes in the door frame, was only a labeler and did no analysis. Grainer refused to respond to this author's requests for an interview. In February 1985, I wrote to then FBI Director William Webster seeking clarification of the apparent conflict between Bureau photo descriptions and LAPD conclusions. Assistant Director William M. Baker responded, "Neither the photographic log nor the photographs were ever purported to be a ballistics report. The descriptions were generated for the convenience of the photographic team in recording information." One would think that random captioning of photos would be a major inconvenience for the case analysts at the nation's most sophisticated law enforcement agency. I again asked the Bureau for clarification of its substantive conclusion about bullets at the crime scene, rather than about its cataloging procedures. Baker replied, "The results of the FBI's crime scene examination concerning that assassination were for over drinks in a Los Angeles restaurant. Lignes told me about the Sirhan Society, comprised of cops, prosecutors, even the defense team. We get together at a good restaurant every year, hell, it's our place in history. FBI RFK case supervisor Amadeo Richards told me in 1986 that he gets a telephone call from Lejeunesse now and then and they get together with the Sirhan prosecutors and others. Nish to the office of the district attorney in Los Angeles and to the Los Angeles Police Department. It was the responsibility of the FBI to assist that agency however possible, not to draw conclusions from the investigation the LAPD conducted. The FBI assistance must have been less than helpful if its crime scene examination reached no conclusions about whether the pantry was bullet-riddled or had simply been originally decorated with distressed pine wood. Moreover, Baker's unbelievable contention was directly refuted by a more knowledgeable FBI source, RFK case supervisor Amadeo Richards. I talked with Richards at his fashionable home in Pasadena where he now collects rare antiques. He emphasized emphatically, no fewer than 3 times during the 2.5-hour discussion, that the Bureau conducted a parallel investigation. It did its own independent evaluation of data, Richards asserted, and reached its own conclusions about the case and the evidence. In 1988, one came across a letter in declassified LAPD files that indicates that the FBI had received a similar request for clarification in 1977 from the Chief Administrative Officer of Los Angeles County. In a letter co-signed by one of his investigators, Harry L. Hufford wrote, "If more bullets were fired within the pantry than Sirhan Sirhan's gun was capable of holding, we should certainly find out who else was firing. If, in fact, the FBI has no evidence that the questioned holes were bullet holes, we should know that so that the air may be cleared." I have found no response to this letter either. In LAPD files or FBI files, the Bureau's closed mouth and contradictory posture on the substance of its investigation seems to have translated into extraordinary secrecy, even as public disclosure was being required. In December 1984, one joined political scientist Greg Stone in a Freedom of Information Act request for FBI case files. With the help of some of the nation's leading experts on FBI files and the expertise of Washington Attorney James H. Lesar, our detailed request produced more than 32,000 pages of previously unreleased documents. Unlike similar FBI releases, such as the files on the assassinations of President Kennedy and Dr. King, these documents arrived purged of the names of FBI personnel, save J. Edgar Hoover and case supervisor Amadeo Richards. The Bureau stated that agents' privacy outweighed historical research. We responded that with the names of more than 100 RFK case agents in hand, disclosed in previously released files and publications, the secrecy was unnecessary. Agents still had a right to refuse to talk, but the public deserved to know who did what in this controversial case. The FBI responded that it would only disclose an agent's name within the precise context in which it was previously disclosed, and no other. If, for example, we could provide documentation that an agent had conducted a particular interview, we could have the agent's name restored to the released interview. We refused this less than generous offer to officially give us what we already had. The FBI's position seemed aimed more at concealing who did what than protecting privacy of agents whose identities are already a matter of public record. In federal court in Washington, D.C., Attorney James Lesar challenged the Bureau's secrecy on behalf of Stone and myself. He presented 19 supporting affidavits attesting to the public interest importance of not deleting the names of agents. Affidavits from academics, journalists, authors of major books about the FBI, and even one from the Bureau's former Freedom of Information Office directors, as well as a retired agent. The FBI presented not one affidavit. But in January 1989, Judge Charles Ritchie ruled in favor of the Bureau's continued secrecy, stating, in part, that the agents' expectations of privacy and freedom from possible harassment outweighed the value of public disclosure. This, even though the unresolved evidentiary controversies manifested in the Bureau's own files were clearly presented to the court. A 3-judge federal appeals court unanimously upheld Judge Ritchie's decision. Returning to our research in LAPD files, we found that in 1974 the department generated a further explanation of how officers Rozzi and Wright came to be photographed examining a hole in the doorframe. The memo was to then Assistant Chief, today Chief Daryl Gates, and is written by 4 of the officers who, according to LAPD logs, played a major role in developing the evidence. This additional explanation to support the non-existence of bullet holes in the now famous photo went as follows. Officers Rozzi and Wright were interviewed by LAPD in 1974, and they revealed that the photo resulted because they were merely complying with Chief Thomas Redden's policy of full press cooperation. The press asked them to point to holes, and they did. According to the memo, the photographers then asked if the holes were bullet holes. They, Rozzi and Wright, replied, I don't know, could be. There is no record of these alleged interviews of Rozzi and Wright with LAPD officials anywhere in the police files, apart from the 1974 memo, which purports to quote them. The story attributed to the two officers conflicts so sharply with Rozzi's 1975 affidavit to Bugliosi, in which he stated that he personally observed what he thought to be a bullet, that it raises the question of whether these contradictory, self-serving 1974 LAPD interviews ever truly took place. In 1975, Congressman Allard K. Lowenstein and Greg Stone obtained from the LADAS office 3 LAPD photos, one of Wolfer and 2 of other officers besides Rozzi and Wright, pointing to particular locations on the doorframe. Were these also a product of the willingness to pose anywhere for the press, spawned by Chief Redden's policy of press cooperation? Was this policy in the forefront of everyone's mind during the crime scene search? Could the shock of a second major American political assassination? Within 2 months, Dr. King in April 1968 and Senator Kennedy in June have caused this glasnost on the part of LAPD. The 1974 memo to Assistant Chief Gates shows the downside of this policy. It contends, due to the Associated Press photo, the door frame was later removed and examined. It was determined that there were no bullet holes in the door frame. In this preposterous new version of the official history of the case, the very booking into evidence of the wood was caused by a mislabeled photographic mock-up that quickly circled back on LAPD to shape its crime scene search. In 1975, then Los Angeles District Attorney John Van de Kamp sought to refute the mounting public suspicion concerning excess bullets. Court order in hand, the DAS investigators executed what critics would dub the Great Pantry Raid, searching after the 7 years cold trail of the missing bullets. Descending upon the crime scene armed with an array of instruments and video cameras and followed by a small army of press, the authorities, including Assistant Chief Darrell Gates, conducted a meticulous search for bullets and bullet holes. The press had to wait outside, which could only have enhanced their sense of drama. The searchers stoically ignored the fact that the most relevant holes had been removed and destroyed 7 years before those in the original door jamb and ceiling tiles. They concluded that one supposedly surviving hole, which in 1968 had allegedly been labeled as a bullet hole, could now be determined to be a nail hole. The day after the raid, an official spokesman dramatically announced that no other bullets were found last night. In subsequent correspondence and press releases, Van de Kamp and his office would tout this bizarre exercise as a manifestation of our continuing interest in making sure that no significant stone remains unturned in this matter. 3. Rather than focusing its attention on where the destroyed physical evidence used to be, the case would have been better served had Van de Kamp's office conducted a new, thorough investigation of existing files and witnesses, especially FBI and LAPD personnel. In the same year as the Pantry Raid, retired 15-year FBI veteran William Bailey was teaching criminology at a New Jersey college. He attended a lecture by Vincent Bugliosi and, afterward, told the attorney that he had worked at the RFK crime scene and definitely saw what appeared to be bullets lodged in the doorframe. It was not until 2 years later that Van de Kamp's office contacted Bailey after somehow receiving a copy of an affidavit that Bailey had given Bugliosi. Apparently, it was more important to debrief hotel carpenters via detailed, transcribed interviews than to talk with veteran investigators from other law enforcement agencies. In 1977, the district attorney's office investigator, William R. Burnett, telephoned William Bailey. Bailey, there were at least 2 bullet holes in the center post. Burnett asks how Bailey knows this. Bailey, short of actually taking the wood off myself and examining it, I would say that I'm reasonably certain they were bullet holes. I've seen bullet holes in wood before. I looked into these holes, they were definitely not nail holes. There appeared to be objects inside. Burnett did not ask Bailey to elaborate on the objects but asked if any other agents could corroborate this. Bailey replied that Agent Robert Pickard could. The tape recording of this conversation was released to researchers like myself in 1986 during the first public access to the DAS RFK case files. It was not in the main file but in a separate box located at another DA branch office in Los Angeles. It was brought to the downtown office by an official who never assessed its contents. It was processed for disclosure by a young intern who had no knowledge of the case and did not screen the tapes prior to release. The box contained considerable data that was in conflict with the official version and may have been purposely segregated from all of the other case files by officials. In May 1990, former FBI agent William Bailey appeared at a Los Angeles press conference demanding a reopening of the case. Having seen the close-up photo of the center divider that the FBI had labeled as manifesting 2 bullet holes, he could now correlate the site of the released photo with what he remembered physically. Observing at the crime scene, I personally observed in that center divider, depicted in that photograph E3, 2 bullet holes. I looked at them very closely. I did observe what appeared to be the other participants were Paul Scrade, an RFK friend wounded during the assassination, journalist Dan Moldia, political scientist Greg Stone, media producer David Mendelsohn, and this author. Base of a bullet in each hole. The DAS files contain no evidence of any follow-up on William Bailey's allegation of additional bullets, either with Bailey, other FBI agents, or LAPD officers. Bailey could not be challenged for a lack of expertise or dismissed as only a photo labeler or as posing for a photo. So he was apparently ignored by the office that pledged to leave no stone unturned. LA law would seek to disarm the growing furor over destroyed evidence and sightings of extra bullets by putting the best possible spin on the 1,975 findings of a court-appointed panel of 7 independent firearms experts. The panel resulted from a lawsuit initiated by assassination shooting victim Paul Scrade and CBS News. With considerable help from superficial media coverage, LA authorities were successful in appearing to have put the questions and controversies to rest. Headlines from Los Angeles newspapers on October 6 and 7, 1975, cried out, "Only one gun." 7 experts say RFK slain by single firearm and RFK second gun theory ruled out. While it is true that the panel found no evidence of a second gun, the headlines were very misleading. The experts could find no evidence that the bullets being tested came from 2 different guns, nor could they conclude that the bullets came from Surin's gun. Panel member Lowell Bradford, selected by CBS News, testified under oath that the panel's findings rendered the question of a second gun more open than previously. Despite the destruction and distortion of evidence, the case for too many bullets has strengthened with each new public disclosure of files and with recent interviews conducted by the investigators and researchers. In 1987, I interviewed Angelo DiPiero and his son Vincent. Both were waiters at the Ambassador and crime scene. Witnesses. Both men are staunch believers in the official version and are effusive in their praise of LAPD's work and of the police officers who dealt with them during the investigation and trial. There were not 2 guns, they flatly assert. Ironically, both are actually strong witnesses for a second gun. They are positive that they saw a bullet in the doorframe. Vincent DiPiero told me, no one of the bullets wound up in the wall. Actually, it was either the door post or the wall. My father pointed out that it was in the doorframe. I remember them taking the whole doorframe off. They took that away. I don't know whatever happened to it. Angelo DiPiero asserted that there could not have been 2 guns in the pantry because someone would have seen it. Regarding bullets, he said, "We counted the next day the exact number of shots, where each one went. One hit the ceiling, then bounced back by the door, so that's the same bullet." Before the tape recorder was turned on, Angelo DiPiero told me that a police officer explained to him that the bullet he saw in the doorframe was a ricochet. Thus, in DiPiero's mind, it created no problem concerning the number of guns fired. Melanson, the bullet in the door was the door at the west end, with the center post there. A. DiPiero, right. Melanson, the door or the jamb? A. DiPiero, the post. Melanson, did you help dig the bullet out, find that? Or A. DiPiero, they dug it out in 1990. John Bums, head of the California State Archives, conducted an oral history interview with key witness Carl Uecker. For the first time in his numerous interviews over the years, Uecker revealed that he too had seen what appeared to be 2 bullet holes in the center divider of the pantry doorway. Incredibly, no one had previously asked him if he saw bullet holes and, not being cognizant of the significance of the controversy, he didn't think it was not important. After being interviewed by police the morning of June 5, 1968, Uecker returned to the crime scene, which was being examined by law enforcement personnel. He noticed 2 holes in the center. He did not witness the actual removal but was told that the bullet was removed. Divider that he is positive were not there prior to the shooting. He passed through the door dozens of times each night and is sure he would have seen them if they existed previously. 2 holes, which were never there previously. Uecker recalls pointing the holes out to a man whom he thought to be plainclothes policemen. The man responded that everything would be checked out. Burns, how come you thought they were bullet holes? Uecker, because these holes never were there before and I knew where the shots were going to. I saw him Sirhan shooting and I know it must have been this way. In the spring of 1990, investigative journalist Dan Moldia conducted an extensive probe into the question of extra bullets. He did what Los Angeles officials had systematically failed to do. He attempted to talk to all of the law enforcement personnel involved and succeeded in interviewing over 100 LAPD officers and sheriff's deputies. His May 13, 1990, article in the Washington Post RFK's Murder, a Second Gun, provided strong new evidence of extra bullets, based on the statements of some of the law enforcement officers themselves. LAPD photographer Charles Collier was asked how sure he was that he took pictures of bullet holes in the pantry. He answered, "A bullet hole looks like a bullet hole if you photographed enough of them." Only 1 of 98 Collier photos apparently taken at the crime scene have been accounted for. Patrolman A1 Lamoro told Moldia, "I do recall seeing 1 or 2 holes in the door around wherever he had just shot him. It was just obvious. Just being a dumb cop, you look and see where the bullets went." Sergeant James MacArthur, the senior police detective at the crime scene, told Moldia he had seen quite a few bullet holes, including one high on the wall to the left of the swinging doors. Kenneth E. Fogel stated that he was positive he saw 2.22 bullet fragments on the pantry floor, and he brought his discovery to the attention of an LAPD official. No such fragments were ever reported or booked into evidence, according to released LAPD files. Sergeant Raymond Rowland told Moldia, one of the investigators pointed to a hole in the doorframe and said, "We just pulled a bullet out of here." Deputy Sheriff Thomas Berenger recalled a man in a tuxedo trying to take a bullet out of the doorframe with a knife, a silver knife, for a souvenir. In 1988, investigator John Christian discovered a newspaper article from the Chicago Tribune buried in released LAPD files. Ironically, in its effort to keep a massive file of newspaper clippings concerning the case, LAPD had unknowingly provided yet further testimony to extra bullets. In 1968, Robert Weidrich was a veteran crime reporter for the Tribune. His editors dispatched him to Los Angeles after the shooting. Arriving at the crime scene in the early hours of the morning of June 5, he interviewed Carl Uecker and filed his story. Felt him fire gun, hotel worker says. The article contained the following corroborating revelation: on a low table lay an 8-foot strip of molding, torn by police from the center post of the double doors leading from the ballroom. These were the doors through which Senator Kennedy had walked, smiling in his moment of victory. Now the molding bore the scars of a crime laboratory technician's probe, as it had removed 2.22 caliber bullets that had gone wild. In December 1988, one contacted Weidrich at the Chicago Tribune. He was unaware of the controversy about extra bullets. He recalled for me his journalistic coup in the pantry. With 20 years' experience as a crime reporter, he arrived at the scene not expecting that, as an out-of-town correspondent, he would not have much access to Los Angeles police in such a big case. He found 2 officers sitting at a table near the pantry drinking coffee. Technicians were still examining the crime scene. Weidrich began chatting with the officers and asked them questions. To his pleasant surprise, they handed him a terrific story. "I've seen a lot of crime scenes," he recalled, "but they were very, very cooperative, especially Detective Sergeant J.R. MacArthur, who pointed him to star witness Uecker. MacArthur, God bless him, steered me to that fella Uecker. He told me no one else had not viewed Uecker." MacArthur vouched for the validity of Uecker's account. Regarding the 2 bullets referred to in his article, Weidrich did not witness the actual removal, but he states, "I would have asked, 'What did you find?' MacArthur would have replied, 'Oh, we found these 2 slugs.' The molding had obviously been removed from the wall." Weidrich asserted they had recovered the 2 slugs. "Now the removal of the bullets probably occurred prior to my getting there. But MacArthur would have told me about that, or the crime lab guy would have. They were amazingly cooperative. Especially under these circumstances, they tend to be very close-mouthed. But these guys were friendly as the dickens. I remember writing MacArthur a note when I got back, to thank him for his help." Other supporting information includes a June 8, 1968, FBI memo that I discovered among recently released files, summarizing the state of LAPD's ballistics work. It says, "Deleted Detective Division, Los Angeles Police Department, advised that the ballistics examination regarding the slugs recovered at the shooting at the Ambassador Hotel on the morning of June 5, 1968, has not been completed." In LAPD files, a property report significantly lists 2 pieces of wood from doorframe at crime scene. It goes on to say that both contain numerous holes. In terms of further disappearance of evidence, police logs of work performed describe tests done on door frames and ceiling tiles. None of the results of these tests have ever surfaced. The log indicates that at 3:30 p.m. on June 5, Lt. D.W. Mann examined ceiling tiles both chemically and microscopically. On June 6 at 7 o'clock a.m., examination of ceiling tiles X-ray was conducted. A 1975 LAPD interview with Wolfer states that wood removed from the crime scene was further examined by fluoroscope. The substantive results of these analyses are nowhere in police files. LAPD hasn't even been asked by Los Angeles officials or the press to explain why. Included in LAPD files released in 1988 were 36 crime scene photos, some of which show Wolfer and the police examining the doorframe and the ceiling. It is, to say the least, highly suspicious that not one photo is captioned or labeled, except by number. There is no corresponding log to decipher the numbers. Standard police procedure requires the captioning of photos in the most routine auto accidents. Otherwise, as in the case of close-ups that could be anything from a moon crater to a hammer mark, the evidentiary value of the photos is drastically reduced. Did LAPD really forget rudimentary police procedure in the biggest case in its history? Does the department that has had so much trouble as a result of allegedly sloppy labeling by the AP and the FBI actually have no labels of its own? Released LAPD files contain a summary of an interview with C. Collier, a photo lab civilian who was assigned by DHQ Department Headquarters to take pictures of the crime scene and the senator's autopsy. He arrived at the Ambassador at 2 a.m. and he was assigned to photograph from all angles the following: the podium in the embassy room, kitchen area, and the route taken by Senator Kennedy from the embassy room to the kitchen, bullet holes, blood, route taken by Kennedy from his room to the podium. Obviously, if there were not supposed to be any bullet holes, why was a photographer assigned to take pictures of bullet holes? The paradox is that with all the systematic destruction and manipulation of the evidence in the case record, so many references that would appear to be to extra bullets survived in the released files. One hypothesis is that a complete purge and cover-up was not possible because the problem was not discovered until later, after a web-like paper trail of activities, evidence, and analysis had already been generated. When the shooting victims were taken to the hospital, police at the crime scene had no way of knowing how many bullets had caused their wounds. For example, Senator Kennedy was generally believed to have been shot twice. Later it would be discovered that he was hit 3 times and a 4th bullet went through his coat. Within hours after the shooting, finding and/or removing 1 or more bullets from the doorframe would have been viewed as good news, a rich opportunity to build an airtight case against Sirhan. At a later point, when a total of 7 bullets were sequentially recovered from the various surgeries and the autopsy, and with 1 bullet lost in the ceiling, bullets from the crime scene were transformed from helpful evidence to an instant crisis. They constituted proof of 2 guns and, except for the most bizarre of coincidences, conspiracy. There was a strange, but not necessarily incidental, footnote to the findings of the 1975 Special Firearms Panel. The panel discovered that 2 bullets allegedly found in the glove compartment of Sirhan's car contained traces of wood on both the base and tip. Were these bullets really found in Sirhan's car, or were they dug out of the pantry doorframe? The wood tracings were not microscopically compared to the surviving remnants of the original doorframe at the Ambassador pantry. They obviously should have been. Absent such a definitive test, there are 2 possibilities. One is that Sirhan fired 2 rounds into a tree or board, dug them out, and put them in his glove compartment before he drove to the The panel discovered that 2 bullets allegedly found in the glove compartment of Sirhan's car contained traces of wood on both the base and tip. Were these bullets really found in Sirhan's car, or were they dug out of the pantry doorframe? The wood tracings were not microscopically compared to the surviving remnants of the original doorframe at the Ambassador pantry. They obviously should have been. Absent such a definitive test, there are 2 possibilities. One is that Sirhan fired 2 rounds into a tree or board, dug them out, and put them in his glove compartment before he drove to the crime scene. The other is that the bullets were actually dug out of the wooden doorframe and were mistakenly switched or purposely falsely labeled. We already know that this case betrays one of the most glaring errors imaginable regarding the labeling of ballistics evidence. Dwayne Wolfer introduced into evidence at Sirhan's trial a test gun that he offered as the proven murder weapon, even though it clearly had a different serial number than Sirhan's gun. Extreme secrecy served LAPD well. The department successfully resisted disclosure of its files in 1975 despite legal, political, and administrative pressures. Had the documents been released then instead of 13 years later, the 1975 discovery of the destruction of the wooden tiles would have seemed all the more sinister, given the additional gaps and inconsistencies in the official record. As it was, LAPD could say that the destruction didn't matter, because its work was solid and its files proved that there were no extra bullets, while never having to accept responsibility for where crucial evidence in the murder of a presidential candidate disappeared to. Furthermore, to this day the LAPD has avoided being held accountable for this action. Chapter 5 Second gun. Krantz found no indication that there was more than one assassin, who may have fired more than one gun with more than 8 bullets. Special Counsel Krantz is convinced, from all the evidence, that there was no second gun. Conclusion of the Krantz Report, Reinvestigation by Special Counsel Thomas Krantz, Los Angeles District Attorney's Office, March 1977. Los Angeles officials like to argue that with more than 70 witnesses there could not have been a second gun or someone would have seen it. Actually, of course, someone did. Vincent DiPiero, a witness who was within a few feet of Kennedy at the time of the shooting, became indignant about the possibility of a second gun during my 1987 interview with him. He insisted that the idea was nonsense, he would have seen it, and he hadn't, as previously described. However, witnesses saw different things. Different segments of the tableau of violence and intrigue. Many failed to see the gun or Sirhan or both. We know Sirhan was there firing. Yet dozens of people failed to see this even though they were close to the action. Lisa Urso had one of the few unobstructed views of both Sirhan and Kennedy, from behind Sirhan, and she saw the gun. Still, she did not see one of the most conspicuous figures in the group tightly surrounding Kennedy, the uniformed security guard, Thane Eugene Caesar, who was at the senator's right elbow. Caesar was the only person in Kennedy's immediate vicinity wearing a uniform, complete with hat, discounting the drab uniforms of the kitchen help. Moreover, the majority of witnesses in Kennedy's area did not see or report Caesar drawing his gun, although he himself says that he did. The possibility of a second gun cannot be dismissed by the notion that it would have been in plain sight. Beyond the limitations of eyewitness data, what about the hard evidence, the scientific data? Did ballistics analysis prove or disprove that Sirhan S was the only gun fired? Recall that in 1968, LAPD's chief criminologist Dwayne Wolfer stated that he had conclusively matched all of the testable victim bullets with test bullets fired from Sirhan S gun. In 1975, shooting victim Paul Scrade initiated legal action that resulted in a re-examination of ballistics data by a court-appointed panel of 7 firearms experts. The panel was given a very limited mandate that inexplicably excluded the questions of whether more than 8 rounds were fired or whether LAPD's trajectory analysis was valid. It was charged only with determining whether the bullets recovered from the victims came from Sirhan S gun. The experts unanimously rejected Wolfer's findings. They could not match any of the 4 testable bullets to Sirhan's gun, the other 3 were too fragmented to test. Neither could the panel prove that any of the bullets did not come from Sirhan's weapon. Authorities misrepresented the experts' inability to prove a second gun as conclusive proof that there was no second gun. This was not the only conclusion that should have been drawn, because the experts' more important finding was that the bullets could not be conclusively matched to Sirhan's gun either, refuting LAPD's findings of 8 years earlier in 1968. In fact, the second gun theory had been given new validity, since Wolfer's allegedly conclusive one-gun findings had been refuted. Said panelist Lowell Bradford, the firearms examination simply closes one episode of evidence and should not constrain further efforts to resolve the possibility of the firing of a second gun at the assassination scene. But LA officials would continue to successfully cloak their flawed case in the alleged scientific proof of one gun. LAPD's press conferences and skillful manipulation of the media actually twisted the inconclusive results to support their original findings of one gun. This is an incredible public relations feat, given that the panel of experts actually found that Sirhan's gun could not be conclusively matched to the bullets. How did the truth become so obscured? The Teflon effect was measurable. Even the FBI conveniently adopted or believed the propaganda. The Bureau's RFK case supervisor, Amadeo Richards, told me that all questions regarding a second gun had been answered by the 1975 panel. When in 1985 I queried the FBI about its conclusion regarding the possibility of too many bullets for Sirhan's gun, Assistant Director William Baker responded, the panel members, working independently, examined all the firearms evidence available in the investigation and unanimously concluded that there was no substantive evidence to support any so-called second gun theory. While Baker is literally correct, His response glosses over the fact that the issue remained unresolved according to the experts' findings. One major obstacle to scientifically concluding what was the truth behind the second gun question is the integrity of the evidence. If one or more bullets were removed from the crime scene but were lost, discarded or suppressed, then the validity of the ballistics evidence has obviously been severely compromised. There is another test that could be performed and would be more conclusive than those conducted by the 1975 panel. In the neutron activation test, bullet samples are bombarded with neutrons, and this provides data on the precise quantities of trace elements that comprise the metal. By comparing the number and level of trace elements, copper, silver, sodium, chlorine, etc., it is possible to determine if fragments came from the same bullet or if bullets came from the same batch of manufacture. Again, however, even a high-tech analysis like this one is only as valid as the evidentiary integrity of the bullets under test. With ballistic science inconclusive and seemingly thwarted by the limitations of the evidence, we will return to the best available data, the most credible eyewitness accounts. It must be understood that from the first round of police interviews within hours of the shooting, through the investigation and trial, to the subsequent re-not investigations, the one-gun theory so dominated the process that witnesses were not even questioned about other guns. On the morning of June 5, when LAPD interviewed dozens of witnesses, the primary interest was in whether they could identify Sirhan or the gun. Audio tapes reveal that the witnesses simply were not asked if they saw anyone else fire or saw other guns drawn. One might assume that a competent witness who saw any sort of gun at a shooting scene would volunteer this information, even if not asked. The questioning at all phases of this investigation was so completely preoccupied with Sirhan that witnesses must have thought everything else was superfluous. On the morning of June 5, the traumatized, fatigued bystanders wanted to get home as soon as possible. Police obliged by providing efficient, as one officer described it to a witness, highly structured questioning that focused almost exclusively on Sirhan. Later, during re-interviews, most witnesses believed that the one-gun conclusion had been solidly established and that the case was open and shut. Authorities did nothing to disabuse them of this view. I was told by 5 significant witnesses that they did not volunteer certain observations that we now know to be important. The investigators seemed uninterested or downright hostile to such information, or the witnesses assumed the information was irrelevant because the case was sewed up or because the questioners didn't ask about it. We must also remember that the population of witnesses who saw particular occurrences tended to be much more finite than the group of 77 persons who were in the pantry area. Many witnesses mistakenly thought Kennedy was guarded by the U.S. Secret Service. For them, the presence of other guns would tend to seem natural and appropriate. This author has found 2 witnesses who saw another gun in the pantry, sightings not recorded by official investigators. There may be more such persons who perhaps thought they saw police or Secret Service drawing guns or even firing back at Sirhan. There could also be witnesses who believe that the gun they saw was part of a conspiracy and are afraid to talk. The widely publicized allegations concerning numerous mysterious deaths of witnesses and President Kennedy's assassination have had a chilling effect on a number of witnesses in the King and Kennedy cases. In addition to Sirhan's gun and that of security guard Caesar, Lisa Urso saw another one. During our interview, she clearly recalled someone she assumed to be a security guard drawing a gun. But Urso's guard was not wearing a uniform. She cited the gun immediately after the shooting, just as Sirhan's gun was wrestled from him. But the security guard had a gun, and I think he went like this drawing a gun, or he put it in a holster or something. The guard put it back into a holster. She described the man as blonde and wearing a gray suit. He was located by Kennedy. Urso said she had mentioned this guard to the authorities on a couple of occasions. They reacted with disinterest on one occasion, hostility on another. A second witness, whom we shall call Martha Raines, told the author of seeing a man fire a gun in the pantry. He was approximately 6 feet 2 inches tall, Caucasian with dark, wavy hair and wearing a suit, not a uniform. Raines had seen the man standing near Sirhan earlier in the evening. She believed that the man constituted a sinister presence in the pantry and was not protecting the senator. According to Raines, the man fired a handgun of some kind. She recalled that the gunman was not composed. He didn't shoot more than once or twice before running out of the pantry. And, as I recall, said Raines, one of them the shots was high and should have gone into the ceiling. I don't know what these people found when they did their ballistics tests, but it appeared to me there should have been a gunshot in the ceiling. the most controversial and well-known of the second gun. Witnesses did tell his story early on. Don Schulman was a runner for KNXT-TV in Los Angeles. Immediately following the shooting, he was interviewed on radio by Jeff Brent of Continental News Service. He gave the following account: "Brent, I'm talking to Don Schulman. Don, can you give us a half-knot way decent report of what happened within all this chaos?" Schulman: "Okay, I was, standing behind Kennedy as he was taking his assigned route into the kitchen. A Caucasian gentleman stepped out and fired 3 times. The security guard hit Kennedy all 3 times. Mr. Kennedy slumped to the floor, they carried him away. The security guards fired back. As I saw, they shot the man who shot Kennedy in the leg. Before they could get him, he shot it looked like to me. He shot a woman, and he shot 2 other men. They then proceeded to carry Kennedy into the kitchen, and I don't know how his condition is now." Brent: "Was he grazed or did it appear to be a direct hit? Was it very serious from what you saw?" Schulman: "Well, from what I saw, it looked fairly serious. He was definitely hit 3 times. Things happened so quickly that there was another eyewitness standing next to me, and she is in shock now and very fuzzy as lamb. Because it happened so quickly." Brent: "Right. I was about 6 people behind the senator. I heard 6 or 7 shots in succession. Now, is this the security guard firing back?" Schulman: "Yes. The man who stepped out fired 3 times at Kennedy. Hit him all 3 times, and the security guard then fired back, hitting." Brent: "Right." Schulman: "Hitting him, and he presumably Sirhan is in apprehension." In 1971, journalist Ted Karish interviewed Schulman for his film The Second Gun. Schulman stated that the uniformed guard Caesar fired his gun. But in a lengthy 1971 interview with the DA's office, Schulman flatly denied that he saw the guard shoot Kennedy, or that that's what he had said in his crime scene interview with Brent. "I didn't even see Sirhan shoot Kennedy," he told the DA's men. Despite the intense pressure exerted upon him during the lengthy 1971 interview, pressure to be absolutely positive about what he saw, pressure not to allow himself to be exploited by sensationalists, etc., he insisted he saw the guard fire and also that he saw wounds erupting on Kennedy's body. But he refused to make a connection between these 2 events. His final response to the intimidating challenges from his questioners was that he was pretty doggone sure the guard fired a gun. In his original radio interview with Brent, Schulman stated that Kennedy had been shot 3 times. The media, Kennedy's press secretary Frank Mankiewicz, and the crime scene witnesses unanimously asserted that the senator was hit only twice. Schulman recalled that the media tried to correct him during a couple of his interviews, but he stuck to his story. The autopsy proved Schulman right. This lends credibility to his claim that he actually saw bullets impact on Kennedy's body. In October 1975, Schulman had his last official interview with special counsel Tom Krantz, who would author the Krantz report reaffirming the official conclusions. During the lengthy, audio tape session, Schulman reiterated that he saw 3 blood splotches on the senator. Displaying a monumental ignorance of the basic evidence, Krantz later commented, on the same tape, "Well, AC not. Truly he hadn't been shot 3 times, there were only 2 wounds, well, there were 3 bullet holes but one didn't hit his wounds. Just went through a coat. There were, of course, 3 wounds and a 4th shot that passed through Kennedy's coat. It is incredible that special counsel Tom Krantz did not even know the basic autopsy facts about the number of bullets that hit the senator." During the course of the interview, Schulman's relevant statements about a second gun were as follows: "I thought I saw other guns pulled. I had thought I saw 3 guns. I saw other guns pulled and possibly fired." To the latter statement, an unidentified Los Angeles law enforcement person sitting in on the interview responds, "No, there was no other guns. I thought I saw him," says Schulman. "Nope, you didn't." Later Schulman says, "I have said I thought I saw a security guard pull his gun and possibly fire. Still later, I saw other guns pulled and possibly fired, and I'm not sure about possibly fired." After Schulman's departure, Krantz and his colleague have a revealing discussion while the audio tape was still recording. The latter is putting down critics of the official version, describing one as an assassination buff old broad with nothing else to do. Pejorative references directed at Lillian Castellano of the Kennedy Assassinations Truth Committee. Krantz changes the subject back To Schulman, whom he had just interviewed, he concludes, "I never felt, particularly in light of the ballistics examination, that his statements about a security guard had that much weight." His colleague says, "Yeah, but he really has not changed his story, he's still sticking with. He still sees guns and this kinda shit. I think if this thing is gonna go any place and he's gonna be a problem, I'd like to call him in and we'll interrogate him." Since Schulman had just been questioned for an hour and a half, the purpose of such an interrogation would seem to be information suppression and disposal rather than information gathering. The author's efforts to locate and interview Schulman were unsuccessful. He surely was not a publicity seeker. He had given his original account before there was a second gun controversy, before any of the evidentiary conflicts had surfaced. He insisted during his 1971 interview that he enjoyed his work as a drug counselor and that he did not want fame but only to continue his work. It may be that his apparent diminished certainty between 1971 and 1975 was due in part to the pressures of his status as the only officially recorded second gun witness in the RFK case. In his 1971 interview, he was clearly upset with both sides with what he perceived as pressure to declare himself a witness to conspiracy and with the often demeaning, high-pressured interrogation by officials who were hostile to his story. No record exists in either LAPD or FBI files of Schulman having been interviewed during the original 1968 investigation, despite the fact that his story appeared on radio and TV and in some newspapers. It is as if the authorities wanted to ignore this witness and hoped he would disappear. His name was left off the police list of witnesses in the pantry, and authorities would later seek to dismiss him by claiming that he was not in the pantry. LAPD's summary report states that he was unable to furnish information that materially affected the investigation. This was certainly true by definition, since LAPD had apparently decided that Schulman was wrong about everything, even though there is no substantive record in the original investigation as to how they arrived at such a determination, since there is no record of an interview. What Schulman did know was that he was not the only person who claimed to have seen another gun or to have seen another gun fired. But Don Schulman was forced into a controversial, high-visibility and high-pressured role that he never wanted, that of the only second gun witness in L.A. Law's otherwise open and shut, one-gun case. Yet, the available evidence strongly suggests that at least 10 shots were fired, quite possibly a dozen, requiring 2 guns. 3 drawn guns were reported by witnesses: Surin's uniformed security guard Thane Caesar's and that of an unidentified man wearing a suit. Moreover, Martha Raines asserts that a gun besides Surin's or Caesar's was fired. Schulman is no longer the only second gun witness. And there may be more such witnesses like Urso and Raines whose sightings of second or third guns have not yet been recorded. The Caesar controversy: I have a very good friend who works for the FBI. And after the FBI interview I called him up and he went and pulled the files to see exactly what they reported on me. They gave me the same conclusion the LAPD did, that I wasn't a suspect. Thane Eugene Caesar to journalist Dan Moldia, 1987. Too often, persons who entertain the possibility of a second gun leap to the conclusion that it had to have been Thane Caesar, the uniformed security guard who stood close to Kennedy. As we saw in the previous chapter, however, 2 witnesses reported seeing a gun. Other than Surin's or Caesar's, 1 witness asserts a man in a suit fired a weapon. In this author's opinion, the conflicting, inadequate data surrounding Caesar simply does not support either the official conclusion that all questions relating to him have been satisfactorily answered or the conclusion implied by some that he must be the second gunman. As with most other areas of the RFK case, the inadequate investigation by Los Angeles authorities and their tendency to cover up conflicts in this case rather than attempt to resolve them has left this controversial area extremely murky. 1.